and this is where that really the strategy and the considerations start to take into account, right? And what we tell our clients is you really need to assess what you have. So before you get started on a software-defined initiative, you need to know that infrastructure. You need to know what workflows are in your environment and what kind of capacity you have at all of your locations. I mean, that includes your data center as well as your branch sites. So when we look at a software-defined WAN solution like Cisco, are you planning on leveraging your existing infrastructure that you have out there, right? Are there any hardware, are there any memory requirements that you need to update before you can successfully implement SD-WAN? And when I say that, so from a hardware perspective, and we are picking on Cisco right here, if you're planning on upgrading your ISRs or ASRs in your environment to an SD-WAN image of code, are there any like ROM upgrades or RAM upgrades that you need to put in there? If you want to use integrated security features on those platforms, you do need a minimum of 8 gigs of RAM. So is that something you need to replace or upgrade? Is it a supported platform, right? So you have the ISR 4Ks that are supported, certain flavors, as well as certain flavors of the ISR 1000. So make sure that those are going to be on the latest version of code and have everything they need to really support the feature sets of an SD-WAN solution. And that kind of ties in with the software upgrades that I talked about. But ultimately, having your infrastructure upgraded and running optimally as it is, regardless of your vendor, is just going to make your SD-WAN solution that much more successful, because you don't want to have to troubleshoot something that you think is SD-WAN related that may have been a misconfiguration before with your existing infrastructure, or bugs you were hitting on some end of life or nearing end of support code, right? So making sure that that environment is running to its peak performance before you go down this is going to make your life a lot easier. When we start talking about circuit type and sizing, with SD-WAN, it really is agnostic. I mean, you can pretty much use everything, whether that's LTE, satellite, T1Z1s, Metro, Ethernet, MPLS. You basically bring your own connectivity. But at the same time, there's about 60 SD-WAN providers out there, right? And not all of them are going to support every type of connectivity. So if you're looking for something like a T1 U1 connectivity that you can plug into a modular card in your router, you may have to continue looking at Cisco, right? Whereas if you're in a metro area and you get Ethernet handoff or fiber handoff, you may go with something more like a Meraki or a Silver Peak or Velo, right? So definitely something to keep in mind. And when it comes to a sizing perspective, a lot of these solutions require you to configure that bandwidth on those routers. So as you're creating these site-specific templates that you're going to be rolling out, or device-specific, you need to know what the bandwidth is so that you're not overutilizing those circuits, right? There's a lot of configuration that goes into there, whether it's the WAN optimization or forward area correction, where it needs to know the bandwidth so it can make the best traffic decisions without overutilizing a circuit. And the next is an application audit. Know what you have, know what's really critical to your business. So if you have a lot of Office 365 traffic, Salesforce, SAP, if you have voice, video, collaboration tools within your environment, take stock of those. Because as you implement these solutions, you can leverage the loss latency jitter across different circuits to optimize how those applications are going to flow in your environment. So, I mean, you may have an MPLS connection back to your data center and an internet connection at your branch site, but based off of an AppleWare policy that you create, it determines to get back to, or for a conference call, it wants to use the internet connection. Maybe you have an issue on your last mile, or there was a brownout or something wrong with the service provider. It can intelligently make those decisions for you and make sure the traffic is routed so you're not dropping calls and getting grainy video, things like that. And the last thing from the assessment phase that I really want to touch on that I can't stress the importance enough is prioritize the sites that you have. And when I say that, you want to do so by the function or role of the site, really what you do there from an operations perspective, as well as the different user community and then the sizes of those. And the reason that we say this is because when you move to a software-defined technology, you want to make sure that you're getting rid of all the one-offs in your network, right? I've heard it said before that you want to get rid of snowflakes in your network. You don't want every single site to be different. You want to try to categorize those sites into, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 buckets of a small, medium, and large, with different flavors of circuit sizes and types that kind of fit into each of those to build that out. And the reason I say that is because as you're configuring these solutions, you're setting up your device templates and your site templates. The more that you have configured within the orchestrator or your manager, it's just going to be garbage in, garbage out, right? So you need to make sure that you limit the number of configurations so you're able to leverage the automation and the orchestration capabilities of that platform, and then not get lost in the human process of having to try to figure out which one of these templates that was created actually applies to the site types. And at the same time, as you create templates like that and you categorize these sites, name templates that are going to mean something to you, right? Like large branch 1 retail with MPLS primary, Ethernet backup, and an LTE failover, right? So, I mean, be specific as you create these, because it's going to make your operations teams a lot easier moving forward when you're configuring new sites, but also when you're troubleshooting any issues that may be going on in your plan. Now, the next piece of that is really adapting to a new model, right? And thinking about the new solutions, and from a networking and security perspective, that comes into play as you start integrating a software-defined solution into your environment. So, and top of mind is always solution selection, right? We kind of talked about this before, which one makes the most sense. And again, it's going to depend on your infrastructure. Are you looking to leverage multi-domain integrations? Do you need a big player that has a large portfolio, right? Like the Cisco's of the world, the Arubas, VMware. So you can get the cross-domain benefits of integrating those technologies and getting integrations and configurations across the board. Again, taking Cisco for instance, if you have an all Cisco infrastructure, you have those ISRs in place. You're leveraging Cisco Identity Services Engine, maybe you have ACI in the data center. There are a lot of integration points between all those technologies, especially now with DNA Center coming, where you can kind of integrate all of those technologies into one solution. But one of the cool things, talking multi-domain, is the instance of Cisco SD-WAN and ACI. So you can actually create app-aware policies from ACI in your data center and push those app-aware policies into your SD-WAN fabric. So you get a consistent QoS and quality of experience for an application from your WAN, whatever branch location, all the way into your data center, and then wrap that in a layer of security as well, right? So you can define the custom security policies for those different WAN interfaces. And then another thing you need to consider is deployment options. Typically, when you're deploying an SD-WAN solution, you're going to have 3 different flavors. You can do an on-prem, you can do a partner cloud solution, so whichever partner you really decide to go with, and they'll basically host that in the cloud for you, and they'll manage all the underlying infrastructure and the upgrades for that. Or you can do third-party cloud. So if you have your favorite cloud, Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud, you can host your controllers in there. But again, there's some pros and cons with that, right? And typically, a lot of it will come to a compliance conversation, especially when we start talking on-prem. So, and what I would say is if that you have a compliance problem that would require you to go on-prem, is really the only reason I would suggest it. The cloud is going to be so much simpler, especially a partner cloud, because if you think of from an on-prem perspective, you have to support all that infrastructure, right? You need the storage, you need the compute, you need the team that's going to manage that infrastructure and make sure that that stays up to date. But then you also have to manage the application that's sitting on top of it. Whereas if you go with a cloud option, all of that's really taken care of for you. So you don't have to worry about that underlying infrastructure. You just have to manage the orchestrator, the software itself, right, and make sure that it's up to date and that all the management changes that you're making are handled there. So definitely something to consider. And like I said, unless there's a compliance reason that would drive you away from a cloud-provided solution, I would definitely stick with the cloud. And the next thing is direct internet access. So one of the biggest benefits that we've really talked about is providing better application experience, especially for SaaS-based applications. So if you're going to do direct internet access, what does that really look like? What security features do you need to have? And one of the nice things is maybe you don't go direct internet access day one, right? Maybe you implement a software-defined solution and you keep it all hub and spoke. You send that traffic back to your data center, and you have a centralized firewall there, and then maybe you phase in, say, integrated security features at a branch. Maybe you need to consider a SASE solution or cloud security. So you can leverage things like Cisco Umbrella or Zscaler to do Layer 7-based firewall features, IPS, IDS, DNS inspection at the cloud level, so you don't have to worry about having that kind of on-prem solution, which typically works out really great if you have a guest environment, right? Usually the first things that we see a company or business carve out will be guest traffic because they don't want to have to backhaul that through their data center. But being able to break out that traffic right to the internet and have security policies in place so that those guests are compliant and secure, and then not consuming precious MPLS bandwidth can be huge for a lot of organizations. And it's a step in the right direction when we're moving towards direct internet access. Obviously, the goal would be to get that security hardened and in place so you can start consuming software as a service out that as well, and then coupling in all those app-aware policies so you make sure traffic's routing in the most optimal fashion. Another thing that I didn't touch on there, that last bullet, is service chaining too. So within a software-defined solution, you can leverage a technology called service chaining, and that could be pick your service, right? Whether it's a load balancer or firewall, something centralized in your data center that you want to send traffic to. Because of that abstraction and separation of the management and control plane from the data plane, you can actually say, you know what, if this branch is trying to connect to this range of IP addresses, and maybe it's the range of IPs that are PCI compliant or HIPAA compliant data in your data center, you want to punt them over to a firewall to be inspected to make sure that they're legit, make sure they have the right access permissions to be accessing that data before they get in and can pull up a PCI record, right? So that's where service chaining really comes in, and it's very powerful, especially when you start getting into that situation where you have regional data centers and hubs, and you want to make sure that you have a good distributed, regionalized strategy for sending different sites and locations to different data centers for their service. And the last thing that we're really going to talk about from a strategy and roadmap perspective is the skill sets associated with all this, right? So as you're developing your assessing your environment and figuring out what you're going to get, trying to position the right SD-WAN provider in your environment, how are you going to support that, right? What kind of training enablement do you need to make sure that your IT operations team is going to get the most out of that solution, that it's fully adopted, that they can do all kinds of fun integrations with third-party monitoring software that you have, or if you're in the multi-domain world, how you're going to integrate with the other platforms in your environment to really get that full visibility across the board. Another thing you're going to have to consider is multi-team integration. So a lot of these newer technologies have the networking aspect and the security all coupled into one. One of the first times I really saw this challenge is when I was deploying Cisco Identity Services Engine, right? Typically, organizations who have an integrated NAC or 802.1x have a very siloed approach to networking and security. The networking guys live over here, security guys live here, and you basically throw tickets back and forth if there was an issue on the network, right? But now we're really seeing more of a mesh of all of those, where the networking and security teams are working together, and you need to figure out where that process and procedure is going to come into play for who's supporting what, right? Because there are going to be a lot of networking functions that you configure from the orchestrator, but there are also going to be those security parameters, right? So if we look at Cisco vManage again, you have the integrated security features in the ISRs. Who's going to manage that policy? Who's going to configure it? And that's where like role-based access can come into play, and you give certain permissions to different users who are authenticating.